Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Rob and today we're going to be painting some nightlords. So this is a little bit different from what I usually do. I've gone for a much more heavy metal style of painting for a number of reasons, but partly just to see if it works, practice some brush control, and I think it's always good to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. So if this is just like a one-off model that you want to do and copy this, then I think this is a good example where I think the edge highlights in this manner really kind of pop off nightlords models. And as we go through this video, I'll kind of tell you my thoughts and feelings about how I thought it went, what I probably need to learn and do next, and perhaps some guidance about what you guys do as well. But overall, I was pleased for a kind of like a first attempt when approaching this style, but I've still got a lot more to learn with it. So we're going to start off, we will start off with the airbrush, but actually you could probably get away with not using the airbrush for this, because most of it's brush work. We're going to start with Gothic Blue. This was, a really nice color, between blue and purple. It had some purples in, and I just thought it was really nice for kind of like in Midnight Clad. It's an Army Painter Fanatic paint, one of their new ones, and of course they airbrush really nicely. You've seen me airbrush them kind of all the time, but if you're going to brush paint this, then you can absolutely do that, and it will go over a black primer absolutely fine as well. All I say is if you do it, say, like over a white primer, either hand brush it on or airbrush it on, it will just be a little bit brighter than what you see here. Because it's going over black, it will be a little bit darker. One of the things I would say though is that it is quite a dark color, this, so once it does go down it's quite dark, but I'll come to that a little bit later. So Hive Dweller Purple and Grim Black, so we're going to use this in a 4:1 ratio, so 4 drops of Hive Dweller and 1 drop of Grim Black mixed together in the cup. You can see it makes a really kind of like dark purpley color, and I'm using this as my shade. What you'd often find with the heavy metal guys is that they would soft shade with a brush using kind of like glazes. I'm not going to do that because it's very laborious. I've just speeded up this process with an airbrush. And I think it added some depth to the model, but I think you can also get away and not do this process as well. But I would say that it really darkens the model down, and I don't think that you would ever want to use this as just your blue color. So if you're going to skip all the edge highlighting stages, I think this is probably a little bit too dark, and you'd want to do some further highlights with an airbrush if you're choosing not to do the edge highlights in the way that I do, because it's the edge highlights that really make it pop and make you think, oh, that's quite a light blue. It's not a light blue at all. The base blue is very dark, as we'll see once I start putting kind of edge highlights on, and as you'll see in a moment. So we're going to do some oil washes now. You could use dark tone for this. I'm going to use oils because I'm used to them, I know what I'm doing with them, and they're easy to clean up. But as I say, you can use your dark tone instead, or a black wash or whatever. I've glossed the model first, then I've just used a little metal ramekin. If you've seen any of my previous videos, I often use oils, more often than not, in fact, in my videos. And I've used black oil from Winsor & Newton, and I'm just mixing it with some odorless white spirit. Odorless white spirit, just literally from any hardware store, DIY store, Amazon. I'd recommend going odorless than using odor white spirit though. And then just mix it together, and then we want the consistency, something's probably just a little thicker than milk. And then what we can do is we can pin wash this over the entire model going into all the recesses, so that's going to help to, now it's a very dark model already, but this will obviously make it darker because this is going into all the recesses, so it's just going to knock everything back. The benefit of using gloss varnish though, of course, is that it helps with the capillary action, and by that all I mean is it just helps it flow into all the nooks and crannies that if I was using, say, a dark tone or dark wash, I'd have to push into those nooks and crannies. So this kind of speeds up the process for me. and does a lot of the heavy lifting for me as well. But also, if I slip or add a little bit too much, I can always wipe it away when it's dry a little bit later. The issue with dark tone, or any kind of wash for that matter, is that if you make a mistake, you'll have to go back in with a brush and correct it. So that's why I like using oils. And you'll see that I use washes later on in this process for things like metallics and some of the red elements as well, and the bone elements. But for this particular part, I do like using oils because it's easy to clean up. Again, yeah, if you're looking at this going, oh, this is a great color for Nightlords, I'm going to use this. I still think it's probably a little bit too dark. I think that don't forget I've got like two very, very bright lights kind of shining above this, so it perhaps looks brighter than you might think it looks, but it is a good base. I mean, there's purples and blacks within that soft shade within the shadows. I think looks really nice and quite Nightlordsy, and I think that the color that we've chosen looks nice as well. Once that's done and all cleaned up, we're going to use a 50/50 satin varnish and matte varnish. I do want some of the luster to that color. I also want some shininess to the armor as well. I feel that's quite Nightlordsy, but also I just want the armor to be very, very clean and immaculate just for this particular style. It's not always a style that suits everything, and it's very different from what I would usually do. You usually see me use like a matte varnish. This is just totally outside my comfort zone, so I'm experimenting and using some different things that I wouldn't usually do, and showing you guys some different ways to do things as well. But I find that a 50/50 matte and satin is good for Imperial Fist as well. So Royal Blue plus the Gothic Blue that we used originally, this is a 50/50. And then you can add just a little bit of war paint retarder into this, just a little bit of medium in, and it will just help it to flow better rather than using water. I just find that the retarder just helps it to flow better. They are thick paints because they're so highly pigmented. So just a drop, literally a drop, it will get the paints flowing. Right, on to the very, very hard bits. These are the bits that actually require quite a high level of technical skill and brush control. So you need a very, very fine brush. And then what we're going to do is a chunky, what you describe as a chunky highlight. Now, I think that I probably could have made it slightly chunkier, this highlight, because at the next stage where I try to kind of like do the next level of highlight, it's quite hard to then make it even smaller. So just think about that. You know, you make it pretty chunky. These paints do tend to dry a little bit darker than what they go on, so don't panic so much. You kind of like, oh my gosh, that's so obvious. They do darken down once they dry. But this is great for technical ability. Like, this is a really high, I mean, I'm not saying I have a high level of painting, but you know, the heavy metal guys, their technical skill is very, very high, and it's because they do this all day, every day. This is the first time I've done this in a very, very long time, if ever, doing it like this. So I just think that, yeah, practice makes perfect with this. And what you can see me doing here, this is pure royal blue, which is the color that we had mixed in previously into that Gothic blue. And what I'm trying to do is just make that highlight just a little bit smaller, fit within that that original chunky highlight that I did, and go around and edge highlight everything. I've just shown you the shoulder pad because I think it's a little bit easier just to show you with the shoulder pad rather than the whole model. But I did do this on the whole model, and it was, as you can imagine, very time consuming, but does look good in the end. So it's probably worth it, but if you've got a 30 Tapmarines to do, I think it's going to be somewhat painful, but will look good. Right, crystal blue up next. So with the crystal blue, what we're going to do is we're going to go around the edges. Now, what you can see me doing here is literally just going on the very edge and doing it in a slightly different way than I was doing before. Before I was kind of doing, you know, chunky highlights. Now I'm just trying to hit the very, very edges with this crystal blue, and now it's starting to pop. So when we'll see the model a little bit later, it really is starting to pop now. And then we go to Artic Gem, and then we're going to do what we call dot highlights on edges and corners, and then again this just helps to make everything just pop off the model. So you can see with that very, very, very dark blue, with these highlights, with these edge highlights, it does make everything pop, and I think works really well for the Nightlords. But without these edge highlights, I think that the issue is that you've got too dark a blue to really work as an army. I think it would just be too flat and too dark. Right, onto the red parts. So we're going to use the cool reds from the Fanatic range, which is literally perfect for the nightlords, because we want these winged parts to be cool reds rather than really like bright, heroic, vibrant reds. And this is a base of Basilisk Red. I did 2 thin coats of this. I did the wings on the helm and the wings on the. I'm going to call it bat wings, but I'm not necessarily sure that's that's correct on the Night Lord's symbol. And then we're going to use purple tone, and again I use this on the wings on the shoulder pad, but also the wings on the helm as well. And basically, this is just like you would use a wash, and we just wash this into areas, and this is basically just lining and recess shading the wings and the helm as well, just to add some depth in the same way that using that Nuln oil adds depth. And I think that purple is a good counter to this particular red, and just reinforces the cooler nature that we want from these reds. So again, once that's all dry, we're going to go back in with the Basilisk Red, and then we're just going to be a little bit more careful now. Again, this whole model, I'm trying to be really careful with everything that I do, and approaching everything carefully. So essentially, I'm just leaving a thin purple line between the recesses, and then hitting this over the flat areas and the highlight and the raised areas, and just picking it out with Basilisk Red. Now this looks actually quite good. You could just leave it here if you want to, but I'm going to kind of further highlight this. And again, these are cool reds, so I think they work really nicely with this scheme. So we're going to use pure red next. And again, this is what the army painter describe as a cool red. So basically it tends towards the cooler side, so it tends towards the more purple sides of the color wheel. And you can see that like the Basilisk Red had some, you can see it's got like purples in it. This pure red though is, it's a just pretty standard red, but just towards the cooler side. And as you can see, I'm really trying to take my time with this, just hitting the raised areas. And then I shall the flat parts between the raised areas I'll try and hit as well, but just making sure that I'm not hitting kind of like that purple line in between the raised areas and the flat sides as well. So this is just about taking your time, making sure the paint is workable, making sure that we can build it up into thin layers. And just remember, if you need to leave it, let it dry, come back to it, then do that. Of course, one thing I would say about doing a scheme like this is it is time consuming. It took me a lot longer to paint this model than it would usually do, even in comparison to the Imperial Fist that I did for you guys in the last video. This took a lot longer just because of the time that's needed to kind of do all these edge highlights. There's no forgiveness in this process, is what I would say. Raging Rose next. So this is the top end of the cool reds in the flexible triad, and then like we did with the armor, we're just doing dot highlights for the bottom of the raised areas on the wings, and then the top parts as well. So anything that's basically a corner we'll just hit with this raised red, and then that's all finished, that's all done. And then we would do exactly the same on the helmet with the red wings on the helmet as well. I'm sure there's a technical name for them. Right, the bone areas. So we're going to do Boney Spikes. And this is what I tend to use for all my bone at the moment. I kind of just got into the habit of using these colours. It's pretty straightforward. So 2 thin coats of Boney Spikes. Nothing fancier than that. And then we're going to use light tone first, and then we'll use purple tone. So light tone all over wash, which gives that kind of bone colour, and then once that's dry, we'll hit it with the purple tone. But as I say, this is just a really simple way to do bone, but works really effectively, just using essentially one colour, which is Boney Spikes. And then I will highlight further with this colour a little bit later, and then you could potentially do some dot highlights with pure white a little bit later. But the light tone, I think I use this an awful lot actually on lots of things like silvers, metallics, light tone. I use it an awful lot but for bone it works really well as well. And then we're just gonna add some purple to this bone in the darkest areas, and this adds real depth to the bone. But because we've got overlapping those warm light, the warmth of the light tone and the coolness of the purple, it looks really good when it's dried. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is quite purple, when it's dried, it looks it looks slightly different. So don't panic, go with it. But I think it's it looks good. And then once the purple's dry, you can then highlight with the Boney Spikes again. So gunmetal for all the metal elements. I didn't want to make this model any darker, so I decided not to do the soft armor. I didn't do that black. I made a conscious choice because I didn't want to darken the model down further by painting kind of black onto the model. So I was really cognizant of that with the soft armor joints and these blades as well. I knew that I wanted to use silver rather than black. I think that was a conscious choice because I was quite aware that it's already quite a dark model. I've run out of dark tone, so I've used Grim Black speed paint, and I just mixed it with a little bit of water and then use that as a wash all over. And it's quite a dark wash, works quite effectively, but I just basically need to buy some more dark tone. That's the only reason I've run out of dark tone, which is testament to how much I use it, but I need to order some more, which is what I said in the last video. And then I got to do this, and then I got to it, and I was like, oh no, I remember I've run out. But yeah, so Grim Black just mixed with a bit of water, and you can just use this as a nice wash on silvers, and it will darken everything down and matte everything down in the shadows. And then some shining silver. You could also use mithril silver, completely up to you. And then you can just do your silver highlights. If it killed you to do all those edge highlights, then you could just do a bit of dry brushing with this. I've tried to just go in quite carefully with this light silver just to pick out the raised areas, but there are of course lots of raised areas on those lightning claws, so just giving it a bit of a dry brush or an overbrush I think works quite nicely and will be enough. People will be looking at your zinging edge highlights rather than the metallic areas, so you can afford to be a bit quicker with the metallics. True copper, I've also added the helmet in here, so you can see here I've highlighted back in with Boney Spikes on the helmet, just on the raised areas. But true copper, just to break up those silver parts. You could be more adventurous with the copper. I did kind of consider doing it on the studs, but decided not to. Decided to go for silver, but I think it would work on the studs quite nicely. And then I washed all those copper elements with purple tone, which if you've seen any of my videos before, I always tend to use a purple wash on coppers. I just like the look of it, but you could use like a brown or a light tone. But yeah, I think purple works really, really effectively with coppers. And then you can mix that true copper color with a bit of shining silver and then just do some highlights from there as well. And then that is the coppers. It's literally as simple as that. And then that is it. That's the model complete. And I'm going to show you how to do the base as well. But that's essentially it. I didn't do any lightning on this model. I'll talk at the end about why I didn't do any lightning. But we're going to go to the base now. So we're going to use deep grey, uniform grey, and company grey. And I'm going to use a makeup brush here. And that's because, you can just absolutely brutalize these makeup brushes. And they're kind of like perfect for these kinds of jobs, really, where you've got to put them through a lot of work. If you're doing like 30 marines and you've got 30 bases to do, these are kind of perfect, really, because they're pretty disposable. But I do try and reuse them as much as possible. But they're good. I think just some makeup brushes work really, really well. So give your entire base a good coat. You could do this with an airbrush, but I was just like, what's the point of getting the airbrush out? I can just do it just as quickly with the makeup brush, and make sure it's dry before moving on to the next step. I try to show you all the parts of this because I often get asked how do I do bases, and I thought, you know what, I will show you guys the entire process with this one. So we use that next color, think it's uniform grey was the next colour up. And then we just give it a dry brush from here, and then we use that then what I did next was mixed in, so I think it was the ash grey was the top highlight. I mixed in some ash grey into this uniform grey just to kind of edge highlight, well, dry brush it a little bit further just to lighten it up from there. I think that that top color that we used was just a little bit too bright. I think you saw me there putting it on, and I was like, oh, that's a bit too white. So I just kind of like mix the two together, just to pick out the edges. And I will come back to that mix as well a little bit later. But for now, we're going to use Scarab Green and Night Sky. This is where I am going to use the airbrush, and I thin this right down. So 50-50 mix, and it makes this lovely desaturated blue-green color. If you're familiar with Coal Black by P3, it's a very similar color to that. And these two mixed together, yeah, it's great. It makes a really nice desaturated, like blue-green color that you could use for all sorts. Like you could use this as a base coat for like Sons of Horus or whatever, but just to give like stone some depth and some shading, especially if you're going to use some like orange or brown weathering powders like we're going to do, it will really contrast nicely against those elements. So yeah, this I think works really effectively. So yeah, so go around, just give your the base a shade, just leave some of that grey, but you can hit the sides of the base with this, but just hit some of that grey. And then from there you can give it then a dry brush, those edges again, with a bit of uniform grey, and I think it was ash grey. I think it was the top highlight. I don't have the colours right in front of me at the moment, so yeah, so, and then just give it a dry brush. Right, some weathering powders. So it's completely up to you what weathering powders you use. These ones I think were the Forge World out of production weathering powders, but of course there are lots and lots on the market. And I've decided to go for like a red tone here, but a brown tone would work just as well. And I've mixed this with a few drops of water, and I'm being quite careful. What I'm doing is I'm just placing this into the nooks and the crannies and the recesses of the base. You don't need to absolutely swamp this. I want to see some of that grey-green stone left behind. But you can see why that kind of like that greeny blue colour works so well, because it contrasts against the orange, and you can start to see it going on here. And on the base it contrasts really nicely. If you don't follow him online, me and a guy called Painted Teeth Ben, I think is at Painted Teeth. He did something similar with his White Scar bases. Like we had talked about kind of what kind of colours that he should use. And we kind of came up with like a red color, but I absolutely loved his kind of shading with this blue green. So I've kind of done a riff off that, really different colors, but yeah, a riff off that kind of like base, and I think it looks it looks really nice. I forgot there's a little metallic tube sticking out, so I painted the tube silver and then just hit it with some weathering powders. That is enough. Like you don't even need to like wash it and shade it. What's the point? You'll just cover it in some weathering powders. You can see some of the metallic underneath as well. And then I have attached the model to the base. I just took the model, I clipped the model while it still had the pin on, drilled a hole into the resin base, and then just use some super glue to stick him in so he's nice and secure. You don't want these guys popping off their resin bases, so having the pin and drilling it in is the way. And then I did the rim, and I did the rim in a black, but you can see kind of where this model is now, so it's super clean. You could add, if you wanted to, some of that weathering powder that mixed with water to the feet, but I just made a conscious choice to try and keep this model as clean as possible, just because of the style of painting. So I decided against adding weathering powders to the feet of the model, but I was pretty pleased with kind of when I had it in the hand at this point. I was like, yeah, this looks pretty nice. There are still things that I need to learn, and there are still things that I need to practice, most importantly, that getting those highlights chunky, smaller and smaller, and getting them cleaner and cleaner and cleaner I think is important. The other thing I would say with this Night Lord scheme is that the blue is so dark when it goes down initially that I don't think it would make a very good color for a Night Lord's army. But the moment that you start adding edge highlights to it, I think that then it starts to come together and really zings and really pops. But I think that if you don't have those edge highlights, I think that you're choosing to go with an airbrush highlight, I think you just need to be mindful about keeping your highlights quite tight with the airbrush, because otherwise the risk is if you use the vivid blues that I used for the highlights, for the edge highlights, as just airbrush highlights, you're going to end up looking like you've got ultramarines. So I think that's just something to be cognizant of as you're moving forward. And if you're choosing to do Night Lords with an airbrush, you've just got to make them very, very tight, I think, those airbrush highlights, to add to make sure it's highlighted, but also to make sure you get that kind of like midnight blue in the shadows as well. I think Night Lords is a hard one to get right because you're always treading the line between that dark purple blue color and then also not trying to make it look like ultramarines as well. But I hope you enjoyed my rendition of this Night Lords marine. I'm sure lots of you questioning why I didn't do any armor. I just wanted to keep didn't do any lightning on the armor. I just wanted to keep it clean, straightforward. I didn't want to overwhelm myself with trying out new skills and then adding the new skill of doing lightning to the armor as well. Also, I'm not sure if I'm a fan of lightning on armor, to be honest. I think that actually I just quite kind of like that clean Night Lords look. So if I do any more in the future, I might practice with some lightning. But I hope this has been useful for you guys, and I hope that you've got something out of it, particularly with the color choices and what I would use in terms of the colors, particularly those base colors. And I look forward to seeing what you guys do with it. And if you got this far in the video and haven't subscribed, make sure you do. If you enjoy the video, make sure you leave a comment, and don't forget to like it as well, and all those things that YouTubers usually say at the end of their videos. But just know that I really appreciate you guys watching my videos and taking the time to watch them, and I hope they're useful, and I shall see you guys on the next one.